Welcome back to Tabletop Assault. I'm Ross, and today I'm going to be having a look at ranking which 40k model range needs updated. This is a bit of a sort of hot topic at the moment. People are talking about how we're going to update 40k. Starting off with Adepta Sororitas, and they're getting my lowest ranking of 0 out of 10. So let's face it, anything I mentioned here, they're going to be up to date. The whole range was brought out in the later part of 8th edition, and they're getting more upcoming. So it's fair to say, after the current stuff that's coming out, no more. I think we're kind of done with Adepta Sororitas. Could they do with a bit more? Yeah, they could do with maybe a flyer unit. That might be quite nice for them. But generally, because the range is no more than a year or two old, and it's had a huge amount of stuff added to it, it's even now getting armoured units, you know, in terms of the battle suits. That gives them a strong role in both light and heavy, plus also ranged and combat. Now I just feel that we're really getting a really good stage with Adepta Sororitas. They work in a number of ways, their models are really up to date. Fantastic. Again, a 0 out of 10 because we've also got Imperial fatigue. We don't need more Imperial stuff. Generally, the community, I feel, wants a little bit more focus on some of the Xeno side. So Adepta Sororitas, 0 out of 10. Are they perfect? Nope, but I think that they are pretty much there. Next, we're coming to the Adeptus Astartes, aka the Space Marines, and they are getting a 1 out of 10. Many people might argue that they should be at 0, and I do believe there is a little bit of tiny leeway in terms of updating Astartes. Now, this would actually be significantly higher if it wasn't for Indomitus. This would have probably been a 6 out of 10 if it wasn't Indomitus, mainly because Primaris really did fail when it came to any sort of combat equivalent, but Indomitus really did fix that. So what are the pros I say that gives them that 1? Now, there's really just simply put, we don't have any sort of jump infantry that's designed for close combat, and that hurts maybe some of the other factions like Blood Angels, where they might have wanted, you know, Death Company intercessors that had jump capabilities. I think that's been asked for a lot, but in general you need to probably have these jump infantry that can jump into combat and really slash some stuff up. Along with maybe a flyer might be good for Primaris. You know, we've got the Firstborn, and then we don't really have a Lord of War for Space Marines. We just have Guilliman, and I'm not generally a fan of him. So that gives them that 1 point that if there's going to be some updates, if we're going with this whole idea of Primaris the way forward, these are the small areas that would have jump into. Maybe a Lord of War would be nice for them. That'd be pretty cool. The one in Forge World is awesome, and some jump combat infantry would be good. The main cons for not updating them, let's face it, Primaris have had huge updates for Space Marines. It's basically just taking the old range and adding a huge blob on top of it, and that was both in 8th and 9th edition. So maybe we are kind of done with that. Plus they now play into several roles. They do have their range, they have their close combat, so they're not lacking in terms of data sheets or anything as well. Speaking of, the roster is just completely unwieldy now. I think if there isn't 100 data sheets, it's going to be very, very close to it. So I think it's now at a stage where Astartes, there is certain things you could add, but I wouldn't add much more, because you are getting into a codex where it's just so many in one. So again, a 1 out of 10 just because I can see some small bits I would nitpick at, but they're definitely not going to warrant being any higher. On to Adeptus Custodes, and they are getting a 6 out of 10, which to some might be a little bit high, but we'll talk about that right now. Is that have a look at their breakdown in terms of HQ choices. They don't really have many. They have one special character, then the same one in different types of armour or a bike. Their troop choices are kind of limited. Now, I'm taking this in perspective of the Adeptus Custodes, not including the Sister of Silence. I presume when their codex comes out, it's going to be Talons of the Emperor, and they're going to be combined. But yeah, their troops are kind of up to date. They do have a couple of options there, in terms of if you include the Sister of Silence. Lord of War, they do not have one, and their model range is up to date, mostly being 7th and 8th edition. But why are they so high in this one? Well, currently that they're extremely limited in the roles. They absolutely favour close combat, and then their range is kind of lacking. Their armour division in terms of their models for 40k is extremely dated, just really a Contemptor, Dreadnought and Land Raider, and this is taken for practicality from the Astartes rather than individual for the Custodes. Now I know that Forge World does help that, but I'm looking mainly at the Codex and the range there. And the range has a sort of scaling issue where I think they're meant to be designed really off 30k models in terms of the height. When Primaris came out, they seemed to almost be not as tall or as, inhumanely bigger than Space Marines as they are sometimes portrayed in lore. So it seems a bit odd in that size. I don't know if Primaris are supposed to be about equal size as Custodes, but I always imagine them being a little bit more. Purely speculative on that one, I'm not quite sure, but I just don't think that Custodes are quite scaled correctly for my taste. Now, the cons for updating them is simply Forge Worlds. That has eliminated many of these issues, that it's actually made nearly half the Custodes datasheets are now from Forge World, and you get Custodes specific dreadnoughts, you get their vehicles, you get different troops, etc. It really does expand the codex, or at least the force out. But I would say there's still much potential that needs to be looked at, the force for 40k in general. Mainly looking at maybe some ranged options for infantry would be good. Maybe another named special character might be nice. And also, more than anything, is some maybe custody driven vehicles. The Contemptor Dread and the Land Raider, well, Land Raiders in general don't do well. But just having Forge World is a solution, but it's not an ideal solution. So that's why I have given them a 6 out of 10. Maybe if they didn't have Forge World, this would actually be significantly higher, because I just feel at the moment if you just use the codex stuff, they don't really work and they need a much bigger advancement. Looking into Adeptus Mechanicus, and they are again only getting a 1 out of 10. It's funny to say that, you think of Adeptus Mechanicus, if you looked back few years back, we're talking about 6-7 years ago, there was people just clamouring to have Adeptus Mechanicus as an army as 40k, and now there's so much of it, I'm only giving it a 1 out of 10. So why have I done that? Now, in terms of HQs, they've kind of got a few options now. When it was the start of 8th edition, it was terrible. Now they've spent a wee bit of time expanding on it. Their troops are up to date. They don't have Lord of War, which is criminal, and their model range is mainly 7th and 8th edition. So the pros for trying to update these is simply put that they're missing a centrepiece model. Have you seen the Forge World? I'm going to pronounce this wrong. Ordinatus Ulator? It's a massive track-based huge weapon. Give that rules for AdMech in 40k, and I don't know if it'd sell because it's so expensive, but it would sort that sort of, massive Lord of War unit, though we would prefer to see an actual one that isn't a knight for Adeptus Mechanicus just themselves. If we had one in the general rulebook, would be nice. Their HQ choices are still a bit lacking. We did sort of sort that round, and then a bit of psychic defense would be good as well. I think there was something mentioned in the Psychic Awakening where they activated a device that really damaged the psychic abilities of units. Also damaged the connection to a lot of the vehicles as well. It was both praised and also hated by many. So it was interesting, bit of Psychic Awakening on that one, but it hasn't really been expanded on. Maybe I need to read the Codex more to see what that is lore-wise. But the cons for this, more than anything, is that I don't think there's been any other force in 8th edition, other than maybe Adeptus Sororitas and Astartes, that got such a big update. Now, they went from having quite a few units at the start of 8th edition to almost doubling their roster in terms of by the end of 8th edition. There were so many units added to it, and that's fantastic. They also do quite well in ranged, obviously, and they do have some close combat options. I certainly played a lot of close combat AdMech during the last edition, so they could have different play styles. And the last important thing is they are Imperial faction. Now, this goes for all Imperial factions. We do have a bit of an Imperial fatigue. We've had so many updates for them rather than Chaos and especially Xenos. So this has been an army that has been highly updated recently, and it's in part of Imperial. I think that there is still slight rooms to go by. I want to see a big, massive Lord of War choice, and then I'll give these suckers a 0. But for now, they're going to get 1 out of 10, so I can get that mighty Lord of War. On to yet another Imperial force, and that is Astra Militarum, who are only getting a 5 out of 10. Which some might seem a bit low. But I will justify it here. Their HQs, they are not up to date. Their troops are not up to date, but we are getting some attention there. Do they have Lord of Wars? They sure do, plenty of them. And their model range is mainly 3rd and 4th edition for infantry, and 5th and 6th edition for vehicles. So the pros for the update is that mainly it's the infantry side that need to be updated. They are beginning to show their age. Now we are getting upgrade sprue for Canadian shock troops, which will give them more of the special weapon options and also give them a different variety of heads. And I think that'll do them a lot of good. The bodies may still be aged in that part, but the heads add a lot more character, and I think there's plenty of heads in the sprue, so you can attach that to heavy weapon teams if you want. There's also the special characters in the codexes are very old, if not actually dead in the lore, so they can maybe do with some revitalisation. I know you got Commissar Rains, I think she was part of a Black Library event, and yeah, it's nice to have her as a new Commissar model, but generally when it comes to the codex we do need a little bit more attention. That would be nice. Just to have maybe, I think when it comes to infantry, does the community want maybe different types of models, different types of rules and data sheets, or would you really prefer to see Cadian shock troops but maybe Katachan, and I forget the other ones, Talaran, I forget all the names of the different types of platoons, but would they prefer to see, you know, different types of them? And I think they'd go on that side. They'd rather have infantry, but they'd have infantry from different planets would be quite good. Don't know how they'd maybe do that. Maybe you need different boxes. Maybe that might be quite expensive, but hey, you know, it would be very, very cool. And then I think the special characters on top of it would really bring apart, you know, the Astra Militarum, make them a bit more full. But the cons for updating is, simply put, the vehicles they've actually done fairly well in terms of age-wise. So many of them got added between 5th, 6th and plus editions, but the ones that do need updated are Sentinels and maybe an actual tank commander that isn't just on a Leman Russ, like an actual leading vehicle might be good. Also they could take a Leman Russ as well, but an actual vehicle communication one would be like almost like a centre for Astra Militarum, a command centre. Ooh, that would be quite nice just to have that. They are also Imperial, and we do have Imperial fatigue. Again, we'd want to see less Imperials being updated. We'd want to maybe see more in terms of Chaos and especially Xenos. But yeah, Astra Militarum, 5 out of 10. I think some people are going to be a bit disappointed at that, but mainly concentrate that vehicles they've done really well on, and they still do well, is the infantry side, almost the half side of infantry, that I think needs a huge amount of attention. Blood Angels next, and I swear we're almost done with Imperial factions for now, and they are getting a 3 out of 10. This again might seem a bit high. It's higher than the Adeptus Astartes, but I will get into reasons for that. So their HQs, yes, they are partly up to date if you include Primaris, but their special characters are not so much, only one of them being updated quite recently. Troops, yes, they're kind of up to date if you include Primaris, but their elites and Legion specifics I'd say are definitely not up to date. And Lord of Wars, they don't have any, and their model range is particularly from 5th edition. So this is getting a 3 out of 10, mainly for the fact that as a specialist Astartes, loyalist Astartes army, they don't seem to have, a lot of their specialist units, you're talking about the Sanguinary Guards and stuff, they don't seem to have been updated. They're still firstborn, and many people are actually okay with that. Sure, we do have Death Company Intercessors, which gives us a sort of specialist Primaris unit, but they could do with jump packs to really make them keep up and feel like Blood Angels. And maybe we need like a Baal Predator that does float. Just simply put, the units that make Blood Angels individual, and this kind of goes the same for Dark Angels and Space Wolves as well, what makes them individual are still in the firstborn stage, and some people are happy with that, but if they're going to see any up to date, especially with Sanguinary Guard, I'm sure they can do a fantastic job with them in the future. They're probably going to be Primaris. Maybe they will, maybe they won't, but I feel all those units that made them feel like they're not just a recoloured Primaris Space Marine faction, they're not getting them up to date, and I'd love to see them up to date, and that's why they're getting a few more points. The cons for this is, simply put, they've just been updated so much already. They've had Primaris thrown at them, they get a huge amount of choice from there, so we don't see much of an update for them because of that reason. And the other thing is, of course, like Space Marines, the roster is getting a bit unwieldy with not only Space Marine Codex, but their Blood Angel supplement just gives them a huge selection of data sheets to choose from. Simply put, I think that they just need like 2 or 3 extra units to give them a little bit more of that individuality back to them. I would love to see that, and that's probably going to be the same for the other ones. The other ones at Space with Dark Angels, when I come to them, it's going to be largely mentioned again. On to Chaos Demons. Finally, we've finished with Imperium for now. We're on to the Chaos side, and they are getting a 7 out of 10. So in terms of their actual units, have they got up-to-date HQs? Yes, they have many. Their troops are kind of up to date, many of them hailing from, I think, 6th edition or more possibly. I think the only one is Bloodletters, which are a bit of an older one. Do they have a Lord of War choice? I don't believe so, unless you go to Forge World, and their model range is either from 6th edition or 8th edition, with one or two looking at an older edition from there. So that actually means they're quite up to date, but there's still a lot of reasons to update them. So although Chaos Demons over the years have been, had seen many up-to-dates, especially in the Greater Demons, they've done a fantastic job over the years updating each of the individual gods' Greater Demons, and I feel that's something to celebrate. Splitting the gods up, even though they're in the same codex, does cause problems the same as Drukhari. Simply put, if you want to take a Khorne force, you're going to actually have a very limited amount of units to choose from, and the codex really doesn't do a very good job of trying to unify them under one detachment. But that's a separate issue in the rules. If you wanted just like a pure Khorne army, which I think with the Chaos Demons, many people have a demon they favour, and it just doesn't feel as satisfying because you're so limited in terms of the units you can choose. In the troop choices, we only have one option for each god, bar I think Nurgle, and their weapon options are extremely limited. Now, I know that the troop choices actually for them are fairly up to date. I think they're mainly from either 5th or 6th edition. I would like to see maybe the demons have each of their troop choices fill different roles. So maybe if you had the Bloodletters, I know they've got their massive sword for chewing through stuff, but maybe if they had a dual wielding sword, that'd be very cool. The Plague Bearers, maybe they would have, they've got combat, but maybe they could have a bit of ranged as well, just so that they have weapon options. Means that you're not just fielding like 3 lots of troop choices in horde mode and they're all the same weapon. It feels a little bit monotonous. I'd like to have a weapon choice in the troops just to give them a bit of a breakdown and a bit of variety. There's also various areas where certain gods do not fill roles, especially in heavy sport. So I think in heavy sport you really only have Khorne well represented with its chariot, and then you've got the Soul Grinder, which is not really over that good. I don't really like Soul Grinder. I just think that maybe there just needs to be a bit more expansion in the range, possibly an over-representation of characters because we have so many characters to choose from. Cons for this, well, it can be argued that they are really up to date at the moment in terms of the models. You saw all the Greater Demons are very, very recent, which is very, very handy. But it's maybe a bit like Drukhari, where they just do not quite have the rule set that works them as a unified force very well. So we'll maybe see that helps people's feelings toward this. But if you want to play a specific god, there just seems to be something lacking. I think if you had the troops doing various different roles, that would be really, really nice. If you had maybe some heavier stuff in the heavy support, maybe a massive demon for each one that isn't a character, isn't a greater demon, it's just one that does something, that would be really cool as well. So I'm giving them a 7 out of 10, mainly because as single gods forces, they're not particularly interesting, and I just think in some areas they are just a little bit lacking and need to be updated. Going on to Chaos Knights, and they're only going to get a 3 out of 10. So that's very simple for Knights. Are there HQs? Nope. Is there any troops? Nope. And Lord of Wars? Plenty. And their model range is mainly 8th edition. So the pros for updating them is that this was a particularly hard case with Knights in general. They kind of got updated already to have smaller Knights and one super large one, which kind of covers a lot of the areas that Knights probably needed. One idea is to maybe have engineers or guards. I think Imperial sort of have this in Secretary, though I think they're Radmech, but there's nothing really for Chaos Knights in terms of small troops that can maybe take the field, that are more designed to work with them, and to sort of maybe work to hold objectives. A possible update would also be if you could have weapon updates. So I think in Forge Worlds for again Imperial, they can have spears and shields, which is very, very cool. I think if you're going to do Knights, that would be a really nice way to go. And I think that, maybe there might be a chance for different types of Knights as well, but with the range they've got, they've kind of got a lot of things covered. I personally don't think Knights need updated. I think that the best way to go forward with Knights would actually be just to have different weapon sprues upgrades for them. So if you could get like a box that would come with either the different weapons that they can get them, so you only need to get really one chassis for them, and then you could get an upgrade sprue which will come with plenty of weapons, and that'll allow you to get a bit more customization with your weapons. I think would do a lot of good. As for new models, I don't think they really need them, but if you had the weapon options, that would be ideal. Chaos Space Marines are going to get a 5 out of 10, just right down the middle for them. So just to go into their units, have they got up-to-date HQs? Yes they do, many of their special characters are very up-to-date. Their troops did get up-to-date very recently as well. Do they have a Lord of War? They do in terms of the Khorne Lord of Skulls, but nothing so generic. And the model range is mainly 6th and 8th edition. So what are the pros for updating them? As they are sort of a faction of traitor Astartes, there doesn't seem to be actually that many traitor Astartes. We've got plenty of demon infused units with Astartes, which is kind of okay, but now we're beginning to see a huge amount of demon engines come alongside the Chaos Space Marines, and although I think that might work quite well, you know, I really want to see more of the actual Astartes. Maybe you need like sort of some kind of sniper unit that would be quite good, you know, working kind of like Alpha Legion. But simply put, I just want some more Astartes units. The other one as well that I have a little bit of a gripe on in terms of why they probably need like a bit of an update is that I feel the Legion specific Astartes are padding out the codex. Now, Khorne Berserkers and a Black Legion, I can sort of understand that. Black Legion should get more of their sort of Legion specific troops. They would have access to these, but them being part of Night Lords or Alpha Legion really doesn't make sense. I don't see Berserkers really working well with them. So I just think we need more general Marines that have more different roles. Would be really ideal to expand the codex rather than having Plague Marines as part of. I think there was one point you could have Plague Marines in a Thousand Suns detachment. I'm not sure if that's entirely true. No, as a Emperor's Children detachment at one point, and that just sort of doesn't make sense. I just think that we need to take away these Legion specific ones, keep them to our Legion, similar to Blood Angels, Space Wolves and Dark Angels, how they've got their own set units, but expand the Chaos Space Marines to have more Astartes. The cons for them being updated is they have been updated fairly recently with their Chaos Space Marine troops and obliterators, and nearly all their named characters have been updated over the years quite recently as well. And the faction can perform in a number of ways, both close combat and range, though this tends to be by using multiple of the same unit rather than a bit more variety. I just feel there's a bit more potential in that. One other thing I'd love to say is that I would love to see a flyer other than the Helldrake. Is it a not bad unit? Yeah, it's quite interesting. Is it Chaos Space Marine to me? No, it is not. To me, that is a mixture of Chaos Space Marine and Demon. It is not pure Chaos Space Marine. Maybe it's Demon Kin as a way to maybe look at it. I want to see a Traitor Marine flying some kind of ship. That would be pretty good. But in general, more Astartes please when it comes to Chaos Space Marines. It should be no surprise here that now that we're on to Craftworlds, I'm giving them a 10 out of 10. To illustrate this so much, you can see by the photos I've put here that the Avatar and the Warwalker, they're so old that I really couldn't find any sort of Warhammer community pictures where they use these two so much, or at least predominantly, and I think that's mainly down to the point of they're so old that they maybe put them a little bit in the back burner. So yeah, Craftworlds, out of everyone, they're the only ones I think I gave a 10 out of 10 to. So are their HQs up to date? Not really, especially named characters. Are the troops up to date? Absolutely not. Do they have Lord of War? Yes, and that is kind of up to date. And their model range really comes from 3rd and 4th edition, while their big things, there's a few in 6th edition. So the pros for the update is that it's an extremely dated range, with many of it coming close to 20 years old now. The range itself has a lot of fantastic aesthetic options. Lore-wise, I can understand Craftworlds are not so indulgent as they were in the past, but that still doesn't mean that they can't have a lot more creativity to them, and I think that can be truly explored. Think of the Drukhari update in like 2010, the difference in 2010-2011 give or take, and it was such a shift in terms of the quality of model, and I think that was just going, well, we had the old, here is the new, and the new was really good. I think that Craftworlds could do with that as well. Iconic units such as the fearsome Avatar no longer even feels fearsome. Look at the equivalent of Greater Demons. I think the Avatar should be a much closer equivalent to them, you know, maybe 3 profiles, different weapons, and absolutely massive. That would be great to have them sort of Greater Demon size, if not bigger, to be a Lord of War choice. Weapons, and this is the point that probably annoys me more than anything. There's many units still in the Craftworld Codex that use chainswords. Now, chainswords feel very, even Astra Sergeants get them, you know, for Astra Militarum. I think that the Craftworld range, in terms of their technology, should be far more advanced than simple chainswords. Look at Warwalkers, for instance. They feel more like they're limited to the 90s in terms of creativity, and I just think the whole range is beginning to show its age. Now it needs a massive update to show its creativity. Cons for update, I cannot think of a single one. Dark Angels next, and they are getting a 3 out of 10, a bit like their Blood Angel counterparts. So in terms of their breakdown, HQs, yep, they are up to date more or less. Their troops are, yeah, they're up to date, though the elites again need to work. Lord of War choice, nope, but we would love to have a certain Lord of War choice that keeps getting hinted for them, but they never seem to release them. And the model range is specifically more around, I believe, 6th edition. So, what are the pros for actually giving them a 3 out of 10? Again, it's mainly due to that the individuality of the force seems to be a little bit worn away. I would love to see more of this force with cloaks, some for the troop choices, maybe a Blade Guard veteran, Blade Guard squad, Deathwing Blade Guard, and they had robes on them as well. That would be fantastic. But I feel in terms of the look, we are beginning to lose a bit of the Dark Angel look when it comes to Primaris, because they don't have the individuality in terms of their cloaks and everything around them. I know their special character, Lazarus I think it was, correct me if I get the name wrong, he did have a cloak on him and looks fantastic, looks purely Dark Angels, but their troops aren't quite getting that certain love to them. So I'd like to see more of that when it comes to Dark Angels. Cons, simply put, once again, no, I hate to say again, it's Primaris. There's been a huge amount of updates in terms of the amount of units they do get, and the roster is becoming a bit unwieldy because they do have the Space Marine force and the Dark Angels on that side as well. But yeah, the only one I want to see here is a little bit more individuality for their units. I think they'd do them really good. Give me my cloaks, I do like a long cloak. Space Marines, so if they could add that, that would be fantastic. Death Guard next, and I am giving them a 2 out of 10, which may seem very odd for an army that is completely new, almost in its entirety, but there is some small bits that are actually lacking in their roster. So, do they have up-to-date HQs? They absolutely do. Up-to-date troops? Absolutely. Do they have a Lord of War? They sure do, in the mighty Mortarion. And the model range is up-to-date with 8th and 9th edition. So why have I given them a bit of a high score of 2? Well, it's simply put that they are lacking a few holes in their roster. They lost a lot of the Legion sort of the Legion generic stuff. They don't have Obliterators, they don't have Havocs, and that really gives them a lot more difficulty in terms of long range combat, having to rely on demon engines more than anything else. I know Death Guard maybe like to move up slow and get close to their opponents, plague them down, but I think if they had Death Guard Havocs with missile launchers and things, would do really well to just expand the roster and give them a lot more access to different playstyle in terms of long range combat. They might do with a flyer as well. Maybe Death Guard, that's not the army to maybe fight for, but you know, Chaos in general need a flyer. The cons for this is very simple, is that we've already seen them majorly updated, and I think it'd be a bit unfair to see them updated further. They are very unique in terms of Chaos Space Marines, and I feel when it comes to Chaos side, it need to be either generic Chaos or Thousand Suns that we need to see an expansion on. So Death Guard, they're doing quite well. I just feel there's one small part in the roster that needs to be fixed, and I'd love to see sort of a heavy weapon Death Guard Havoc squad, and I would almost say these guys would go down to 0 or a 1. Going on to Deathwatch, and I've given them a 3 out of 10. Now, the majority of their force is actually up to date. Their HQs are up to date, though I'd like to see maybe some more Primaris special character. That'd be quite nice. I'm surprised that Space Marine's got so many Primaris special characters. The Deathwatch got none. But the rest, even their generic ones, are very up to date. Their troops are up to date, even I think they were brought out in 7th edition, so they're really, really up to date. No Lord of War, and their model range really comes from 7th and 8th edition. So the pros for updating them is that we just need to bring a bit more into their individuality. Though their individuality units really came in from 7th edition, the Primaris do feel a little bit generic, so that kind of hurts them in some way as well. You know, when you've got the Xenophase sword, I think it's called, I don't believe you can take that on Primaris units, and that feels to me a little bit sore. I'd like to see this more individual weapons that are unlocked for Death Company onto intercessors, etc. I could be completely wrong about that. I haven't read the Deathwatch book in in quite a wee while, but I do believe that the Primaris side is very, very generic to Space Marines, while when you go on the Firstborn side, because they were made with Deathwatch in mind, they got very, very specific weapons that really, really made Deathwatch individual, and I feel that again has been stripped away. What are the cons for not updating Deathwatch? Simply put is that, again, they are an extremely up-to-date range. Even they're just generic Firstborn guys. They were from 7th edition, then they had Primaris added in 8th edition, and then they had further Primaris added in 9th edition. So the roster has been expanded on quite well. But again, I just feel some of the character of Deathwatch has been taken away by Primaris, and I'd like to see that come back in. Next up is my beloved Drukhari, probably my favourite force in 40k and the first one I ever played. So nostalgia has made me completely biased, but I've only given them a 4 out of 10, which can be argued is kind of low. So in terms of their HQs, I'd say they are up to date, but they are a bit lacking in terms of variety. I think there's only really 3 generic ones and a few special characters. Troops, they look great, but they're not the most up to date. They are only 5th edition. Do they have a Lord of War? Nope. And the range in general is 5th edition, with a couple of HQs being updated since then. So why have I given them such a low score? Well, the pros to update them is that they kind of work a bit like Chaos Demons, where it's almost 3 sub-factions throughout the force. So you've got Cabals, Cults and Covens, but the Codex does such a good job of making them still feel like a fully developed army, even when they work together. Very rare do you find people going, I want to take a complete Cabals army or complete Cult army, though it can be done, but generally people would like to take a multiple of the whole Drukhari range in general. Though their faction in general still looks extremely model. They are 5th edition, which makes them nearly a decade old, I believe, but they do look fantastic. I never, looking at them as 5th edition, the whole range does look fantastic. It's very imaginative, it works really, really well. And another one for an update is that just bring back Vect. I think it's probably the model most people are wanting, except for maybe the Lion or a Plastic Thunderhawk. Many people are now just going, bring back Vect. After all, he's got to have a throne off with the Silent King, who's got the better throne. And I think with these scenery based models we're now seeing, from like the Silent King and the Adepta Sororitas one and various ones in Age of Sigmar, this is a perfect time when you can bring a completely lavish model for Drukhari, and I think it would be fantastic, and Vect is the model to do that. So I think there is plenty of potential for an update, but the only thing that I'd say that really sort of puts them back quite a couple of points is that the range still looks fantastic. It looks really, really good and just works out all kinds of well. I'd probably say if there's anything, update the Finecast models. That would be really, really nice to get them up to date. But other than that, the range still holds on. Maybe add on a few units for each of the Cabals, Cults and Covens. That would do really well. I think the mainly other points I put down for was there's other Xenos races by far that need a bit more of an update where their models are maybe falling behind. I want to put Drukhari higher, and I really did originally, but I just think they hold up so well in terms of the range that it was harder for me to justify them to go further than other forces. So a 4 out of 10. Goodness knows I'd want them to be higher, and many people might argue they should be, but they hold up really, really well. One of the newer forces in Genestealers, and I'm going to give them a 3 out of 10. Now this might be a bit unusual because they are a new force, but I'll explain why. Their HQs, they have many and they are up to date. Their troops are up to date, bar Genestealers. And do they have a Lord of War? Kind of. I think you can take a Baneblade, correct me if I'm wrong on that one. That kind of counts as a Lord of War, and their model range is 7th and 8th edition. So what are the positives to maybe think about updating them? Well, there's a little bit of a lack of variety. It's all very light infantry, and then the heavy stuff tends to come from Astra Militarum, with a couple of the heavy vehicles they do have themselves. But I just think that there's a huge potential for heavy mining gear, which would be really cool in some of the infantry, just to have these sort of suits that are designed to all live, mine asteroids or something ridiculous, and having them out on Genestealer Cult would be really, really awesome. Maybe have them shaded visors so people can't really see what's lying underneath. The other part as well is that Genestealers are really, really old, like super. They're not as old as maybe some people would think, but they do look like they're dated quite significantly, so they need to be updated. So, Genestealer Cult, that's what they're based on, although they may come from Tyranids. There is an argument that they do need to be absolutely updated. The cons for this is simply put that if you update Tyranids and Astra Militarum, who both probably need updated far more than Genestealer Cult do, especially in terms of their infantry side for both of them, then Genestealer Cult will kind of benefit on top of it by proxy. So yeah, if you update them, Genestealer Cult get updated. Is there a few things that could be added? Sure, and it would make them very, very interesting. Mining gear would be good, maybe an aircraft that's designed to deploy miners or something like that, or crews that are designed to go in for inhospitable environments. That would be very cool. I think there's still a wee bit of potential with Genestealer Cult, but you've got two armies. If you expand on them, they benefit by proxy, and then be a bit more imaginative. It's like civilian industrial workers in space who've been infected by an alien. That's a crazy sentence of a force, but that's what Genestealer Cult are, and I think there's a few more things they can do with them. Back to Imperials, and we come to Grey Knights, who I've given a 6 out of 10. So are their HQs up to date? Not really. Are their troops up to date? No, they're kind of from 5th edition. Do they have a Lord of War? Nope. And almost all their model ranges from 5th edition, except for the one that came into Triumvirate. I forget his name off the top of my head. Voldus, I think it is. Yeah, I think other than 5th edition, that's really the only model they've been given. So what are the pros for updating Grey Knights? I just feel they've been left behind when it comes to updates. Plenty of Astartes forces have been updated, but Grey Knights haven't seen absolutely none of that, and many of the community are actually a bit thankful for it. However, I believe the design philosophy is Primaris, and it's only a certain amount of time before Grey Knights need to be addressed. Now, will Games Workshop bend the knee and decide, no, we're going to stick that Grey Knights are lacking numbers because only the firstborn can join them? Possibly so, but it will be, I think, only a matter of time before Primaris actually join their ranks. Rumour is that there may be a model coming soon with one character, but that is just a heavy rumour at this point of filming. When it comes to cons, now the only con really is that people are really tired of Imperial, but even more they're really tired of Imperial Astartes, Loyalist Astartes. So although Grey Knights I think badly could do with an update, bringing them more in line with Astartes, bringing them, instead of them being all firstborn, having them being some of the best, but also Primaris, would be really cool. I think that people don't want to see any more Imperial Astartes. They'd rather see Xenos, they'd rather maybe even see Chaos Marines updated. We don't need any more of them. So yeah, I think they actually need updated far more than people want them to. But when it comes to the ranges, I think people would not tolerate Imperials or Imperial Astartes getting further updates. So 6 out of 10 I think is kind of fair for a range from 5th edition that has lost a lot of potential that could have come to them during the latest editions. But we just need to see what they're planning to do forward. Will they become Primaris? Will they won't? Will they not? Who knows? It's divided the community, and Games Workshop will eventually have to make a decision on it. Harlequins are going to be looked at next, and they are getting an 8 out of 10, which is quite a high ranking, especially for a faction that actually has up-to-date models. So do they have up-to-date HQs? Yes, more or less. Are their troops up to date? Yep, but lacking variety. Lord of War? Nope, and the model range is mainly from 7th edition. So what are the pros for the update? Although this faction has been done, it's done quite well competitively, I think at the start of 9th edition, though some of the recent codexes might have made it more difficult for them. They did come at a point of when specialist forces were made. So Admech came in as two different forces, Skitarii and Cult Mech. Then Deathwatch and Genestealer Cult. These factions have been expanded on, especially in the case of Admech, with their factions being put together and then doubled in terms of the roster. Deathwatch really got the Primaris update. Genestealer Cult in general actually had a few more units and then some more on top of it. Harlequins really felt like they got left behind when all these forces were getting more and more added to them. And also when it comes to Harlequins, I just feel like all Ynnari forces, this is a force that has a lot of creative opportunities, and Harlequins hasn't been fully explored yet. The cons for the update is that they are specialist faction. That's what people kind of wanted when they came back. Small and focused, which is quite nice. But then I do believe that they do deserve a little bit more interest in that side. A little bit more to the roster would do them well. I know we have troops, but what if we had troops that played different roles? That's kind of my thought. Rather than loads of different characters, troops that played different roles, support characters, etc. That would be quite interesting to see, and I just believe that they could explore them further. But some people are very much focused that Harlequins should only be a limited force, because that's kind of what they are in the lore. And also Ynnari in general needs a little bit of an update, but it's Craftworlds that are really taking the attention from everyone else. They are the 10 out of 10 need to be updated. That kind of takes away from Harlequins and from Drukhari, but it doesn't mean the Harlequins still highly couldn't do with a little bit more of an update. So their models themselves don't need updated, they just need more data sheets with more units added to them, because I think there's certainly less than 15 data sheets in the codex, I think, so they are very limited when you look at different factions. Imperial Knights are almost exactly the same when it comes to Knights, the same as Chaos Space Marines, and it's going to be 3 out of 10. Now again, as I iterated before, do they have HQs? Yeah, they kind of have a special character, but not really. Troops? Nope. Lord of War, plenty of them, and they're mostly from, I believe, 8th edition, bar their generic Knight, but they did get a few more added in 8th edition. So, this one is particularly, again, difficult one. I don't think it's a matter of them getting more models. I think it would be really nice if they could have more weapons. I think that would be really, really handy. Maybe, as said, an engineering one, as I mentioned, the Chaos one, Secretary. I think they're for AdMech more than they are for Imperial Knights, but maybe they would work as a cool troop choice, though I don't like referring to Forge World as the solution, but that is one there if you wanted to have sort of, because I think Secretary are designed to be more guard of the feet of Knights or something. I could be wrong in that lore reason, but that's kind of the idea I thought behind them. Possibly good update, and I think Imperial Knights already get this again through Forge World. It's just more weapon choices. I know there's a Knight there that has a spear and shield, and then I'd love to see like a Juggernaut Knight, one that's like almost like a battering ram. It's on all fours, and I mean like not quite like the Mauler Fiend, maybe a little bit better than that, but massive dome head that's just designed to like absolutely blunt head charge through stuff and knock it to the ground. No ranged weapons, maybe cool, may look absolutely daft. Cons for this is that, simply put, that Imperial Knights I just don't feel need an update. They got a wee bit in 8th edition, which was very handy for them. Just give them a sprue of more weapons. I think that would be far more appreciated, and maybe think about giving them like a troop choice on the ground so they can get points. But yeah, 3 out of 10, I think they've done well already. There's just a small bit extra that would really make them a lot better. Necrons coming next, and saying so, a Xenos force getting only a 1 out of 10. Don't think many people are going to be too surprised at that one. So Necrons, in their HQs, they do have many generic ones, but their specialist characters are actually quite lacking. Their troops are up to date, they do have Lord of Wars, and their model range is mainly 5th and 9th edition. So the pros for updating Necrons is, simply put, that some of their HQs actually feel quite dated, especially named ones. Sure, you've got Luminar Zaras, what a fantastically updated looking model, but the Sand King also hitting the field is very, very cool, but many of the other specialist characters just pale in comparison now. They also, many of them, bar, I think only one of them is not Sutek or non-dynasty aligned, if you don't include the Sand King. I believe it's our favourite Thief of the Universe, he is not Sutek, but the rest of them, bar Arkan and Zaraz, are Sutek. So there's a lot of Sutek. I'd love to see a Novak named one, that would be really, really awesome. But generally put, yeah, Necrons have done well in the update. Only the HQs is the special characters. I was a little bit annoyed that we didn't see more of them. Cons for update, well, let's face it, this has been an army that saw a huge update with the growing of 9th edition and Indomitus. I think the old Necron warriors were not as old as the Craftworld Guardians. I mean, poor Craftworlds that Necrons saw their updated models from their troop choice be updated again. That says a lot there, but they also had iconic units like the Monolith updated, and they brought the Silent King back. Just illustrates how up to date this codex is. The Necron forces also got updated in terms of combat, and this means that they now have very many ways to play in terms of either combat or ranged. I mainly played combat Necrons in 8th, and now they've only extended it further, which is an absolute delight. So 1 out of 10, I think Necrons are in a fantastic place. Could they be updated a bit further? Yeah, I want to see some special characters represent different dynasties, but in terms of their troops and everything as well, I think they've done a fantastic job bringing them into line. On to the beloved Orks next, and they are getting a 7 out of 10. So are their HQs up to date? Not really at the moment, though I feel that might be changing. We do have Gaz who's updated, and then that mighty good war boss in Mega Armour. I absolutely love that model. So yeah, I think that the HQs may be getting a bit up to date. Their troops are not up to date, and though the Beast Snagas may be an almost sub-faction of them, they are not the generic Orc boys, so I'm going to say no, their troops are not up to date. Yeah, they do have a Lord of War, and their model range mainly 4th. Their infantry mainly comes from 4th edition, everything else a bit later. So what are the pros for actually updating them? The range is particularly dated, especially on infantry side. Boys in particular are showing their age. I just think that when it comes to the infantry, their size and scaling seems really, really off, and I'll go into that a bit later. Orcs are a faction that can slam looted parts together to make really different variety things. I think the creative team can have a lot of imagination going into Orcs, and it's not fully being explored. You can see from the Beast Snagas they've put stuff together on them, which looks really, really cool, but I'd like to see looted vehicles put together. You know, just imagine they had a vehicle that was all but we could tell was a Lehman Russ, but isn't a Lehman Russ because the weapon had been taken off and replaced with something incredibly orcish. I'd like that. I think that would be very, very creative. I know that many people could say just convert something, and we used to have looted vehicles for Orcs as well, and you could add weapons stuff to them. Maybe a rules could be made of that, and that'd be very, very unique. You know, you can go, well, you take parts of X, Y, Z and you make a new model, and it can be combined rules. That'd be very complicated, but very, very awesome. I'm going to try that maybe one day. But there is cons for Orcs. Now, Orcs require a fairly massive update. To update the Orcs, basic infantry would possibly change the scale of nearly every model in the range, would have an almost knockback effect. For instance, if you made the Orc boys a different size, different scale, which I believe they should, then that might affect open-topped vehicles that have these boys in them as well. I worry that Beast Snagas are almost a lore justification not to update the old Orc boys. Basically, you know, basic Orc boys should be the size as Beast Snagas, though they go, oh, because Beast Snagas attack the biggest things, that they're slightly stronger. No, I think Beast boys should be of that size. To this end, the Orc range needs a Sisters update of a huge amount of changed, rather than Astartes one which replaces them. So think of it this way, I think that nearly every single Orc model that has an infantry involved in it needs to be updated like Sisters. I'm worried that Beast Snagas are working a bit like Primaris, where you can keep the old Orc boys and their size and scaling, and then the Beast Snagas kind of work like Primaris, though kind of not, in terms of, oh, lore justification, these are stronger Orcs. I don't like that. I want to see the Orc boys be updated, and I hope that we will see that in the future. New vehicles were added in October. Now, whether that's a positive or negative is up to you, but that was an update for Orcs nonetheless. They did get a few things there. Orcs do have a 7 out of 10, mainly because I think it's the infantry that's the problem. Not so much the vehicles, though I would like to see more ramshankled imagination, which would be awesome, but their infantry is the side that needs to be updated. And they did mention that we haven't seen the full amount of Orc updates yet, so give it some time and maybe we might see something new there. Going to sound a bit repetitive here as we go into Space Wolves, and it is going to be a 3 out of 10. Now this basically is more or less the same points as I have made for Blood Angels, Dark Angels, Deathwatch, etc. So in terms of the HQs, yes, they are up to date. Those special characters could do some work. Their troops are up to date, though their elites and things that make them individual could do with a bit of updating. No Lord of War, and their range really comes from about 5th and 7th edition. So I feel that Space Wolves got the worst when it came to Primaris updates. The Hounds of Mordecai I think are a cool and interesting unit, though Reavers in general a lot of people were a bit contentious on. But things like Wolfen could never really in my eyes be Primaris, though I want an absolute ferocious unit for Space Wolves, absolutely, that represents them on the field, and they can be Primaris. I know every time I mention updating with Primaris, many people don't like the term Primaris, but it is the way forward with a lot of things are going. I just want an equally fearsome unit to be led alongside Ragnar Blackmane, and although Assault Intercessors partly do the job, I need some more pelts, I need some more ferocity. Don't know how you do it with Space Wolves, because I don't believe Wolfen should be the way forward, but we need to bring the savagery back to Space Wolves when it comes to the Primaris side. Again, the cons for this is all but the same. We're tired of Marines, we're tired of Imperial. I don't see many people wanting that, and it is becoming an unwieldy codex. But yeah, 3 out of 10, same as the other ones, just to bring that savagery and individuality back to Space Wolves would be nice. Now on to Tau Empire, and I have given them a 7 out of 10, which honestly, again like another Force Near, which we'll speak about shortly, I thought this was going to be a slam dunk 8 or 9 out of 10, but after reviewing them a wee bit, there was some areas I was like, they're maybe more up to date than I give them credit for. So are their HQs up to date? Kinda, their generic ones and suits are, but their ethereals are all out of date. Their troops are up to date, maybe except for Kroot, but we'll go into that in a second, but anything that is like Tau, Empire, Sept, etc., they're kind of from 7th edition, so I'd count that as up to date. Lord of Wars, yes they do have one, and their model range is predominantly 6th and 7th edition except for vehicles, which makes them one of the most up to date forces in general. Now, where is their weakness, and this is probably the big side of it, is that their auxiliaries feel very left behind. Kroot especially have aged and seem to be a conceptual idea that is not fully explored. I know that we do love the Tau Septs, but they do have auxiliaries which are important to them, and I just feel that this isn't being explored. I feel it's almost been left behind and forgotten about. Though Tau do not engage in close combat really at all well, I'd love to see a little bit of a focus on it, but not in terms of wanting to damage stuff. Think up shielded riptides or battlesuits that are designed to delay the opponent in combat or control their movement. Even maybe they want to try and get in combat, place tags on their opponents, and then next turn they can maybe boost out, and it allows, say for instance, if they manage to engage in combat, put a certain amount of trackers during your opponent's next turn, you can actually shoot them, because the battlesuits can then disengage at the end of some turn, and then you get some shots on them instead of close combat attacks. That might be quite cool. Does that make sense? So it's about your battlesuits trying to lay trackers on them that would bring more danger to them from range stuff. I think that would be quite good. I encourage you to be very proactive using combat, but not for the case of damaging in combat, but to augment your ranged units. And I think that would be very cool. Some people might disagree with me on that one utterly, but I think there's a lot of imagination. You don't need to go in combat just to kill. We're not all Khorne Berserkers, we're not all World Eaters. Tau can use their adaptive strategies to work around it. Many of their HQs feel a little bit dated, especially on the ethereal side, and they don't really have psychic defense, and I feel that, I don't know lore-wise, I think lore-wise they just don't really understand the warp really too much. I think one of their expansions had a real bad experience with it, but I feel there maybe might be some kind of psychic defense they could do. Maybe they shouldn't, maybe compared to Necrons, who should have psychic defense more than Tau, but it might be nice to see. Now the cons for this is that the Tau range, it does feel slightly aged in areas, but many of the units are actually from 2013 and 2015. Particularly the strike, breach teams and battlesuits, all have been up to date recently. So when it comes to them getting a 7 out of 10, I believe it's just the auxiliaries, the ethereals, and a little bit of close combat that's unique to them would really make the force feel very, very different. I think in terms of a lot of things like the strike teams and battlesuits, they're doing fine. Maybe some different weapons for the battlesuits would be nice. Maybe you could add a sprue of just completely different weapons, that would be awesome. But yeah, I'm giving them a 7 out of 10. I thought this would be a slam dunk 8 or 9, but really their range is actually quite up to date, but there's certain areas that could be either reimagined to be cooler, or certain areas that need to be fully explored. We've now got another Chaos faction. We're looking at Thousand Suns, who are getting a mighty 8 out of 10. Some people might find that a little bit high, but let me explain why I think it is. So in terms of HQs, they are a little bit lacking. They all seem to be just sorcerers. They need to have something that's not just sorcery and reroll ones. Something a little bit more different would be ideal. Troops, they are up to date, though a little bit lacking. There's just so few rubrics. Zangors really did pad out the codex a wee bit there. Do they have a Lord of War? They sure do, in the Mighty Magnus. And the model range is mainly 7th edition. So the pros for updating this, again, as I said, it may seem like an odd choice, but Thousand Sons did not get as many new units as they think. They didn't get nearly enough attention that the Death Guard, well, in comparison to Death Guard, they didn't get enough. In the codex itself, it appears there's just not that many Rubric Marines. You know, we've got their basic ones, their Infernal Bolters, and then you've got the Scarab Cult. It just seems to be very, very few rubrics. Zangors are cool, but you know, it's the rubrics, the Thousand Sons, we want to see them expanded on. They have also lost access to a number of units from the Chaos Codex, including Havocs, which makes their long range very, very difficult. I'm not saying really bring, you know, Thousand Sons Havocs, but maybe an equivalent, you know, Thousand Sons with heavier weapons in the back would be ideal. Even a combat Rubric Marine force, maybe they just dual wield the two, I forget what the blades are called, the curved blades that the Scarabs have, maybe they just have them. I know you can sort of get that on Forge World, so if you could have Rubric Marines that are dual wield combat ones, it would bring you more rubrics in a different role, and I think that would be fantastic. Also, I think I've mentioned this a few times in podcasts and when anyone talks to me about Thousand Sons, have you seen their Siren Contemptor on Forge World? Again, I don't like bringing Forge World up as a solution, but it's one of the coolest models. It is awesome. Give it 40k rules. It is printing money. I would probably buy 2 of them instantly if you give it 40k rules, and I think most Thousand Sons players could fairly accept this as a Contemptor Dreadnought. I don't know how it works, maybe lore-wise in terms of dust and everything, did they lose access to it, etc. But I think there's plenty of potential when it comes to Thousand Sons, in terms of just updating the rubrics to have more rubrics on the field, and maybe a couple of key units on it as well. But the cons on it is simply put Magnus, and that's kind of it. The range itself is nearly 5 years old when it comes to the end of the year. They came out at the tail end, December 2016, and it was amazing for its time, the first Primarch to return in so long, and a demon version of that not to boot, and the updated rubrics were cool, but I feel that's where it ended, and there wasn't too much. You only got a very choice amount of units added to them. So I think now is the time, 5 years later, they got a choice update then, they really need to see a bit more, because they're kind of struggling in a way and they're not representing the rubrics of the Thousand Sons enough. On to the fearsome Tyranids, and I am only giving them a 6 out of 10, which, you know, many people have been watching this so far waiting for Tyranids, and they've just seen such a low score, and they're instantly going to turn off and tell me I'm wrong and give me a long list why. Really want to hear it, but again, this was another faction I thought was going to be an easy 8 or 9. But unfortunately, after reading when many of their units came out, especially the big stuff, I had to lower them a few points. So let me justify it here a wee bit. In terms of their HQs, I think they're kind of dated in their HQ choices. The Hive Tyrant, the special characters, are not doing so good. Their troop choices, nope, many of them are actually 3rd edition, which is quite bad. Lord of War, they don't have one, and their model range, well, this is where it's quite interesting. They consistently got updates, especially of big creatures between 4th, 5th, 6th and 7th edition, and no army really got such a big consistent update throughout the editions, bar Tyranids. The only poor part is they got absolutely 0 in 8th edition. But still, I do think they do need an update, and this is where we're going to look at them a bit more closer. So the smaller creatures are extremely lacking updates, and it's truly beginning to show. You've got your Hermagonts, your Dark Termagants, they're both from 3rd edition, and Genestealers from 4th, which I thought they looked older. I thought they were from like 3rd edition, if not even worse. A bit like Orks and Tau, I think there's a bit more imagination that could be fully evolved when it comes to Tyranids, and they do need a massive Lord of War bug. I think it's criminal that Tyranids don't have this massive bug that represents an absolute obscenity on the field. It's huge, it's large and fearsome. I think you can get one from Forge World, but it's like stupidly big and takes up the majority of the field. Cons for the update, a lot of the older models still hold up really well, and this is like the Hive Tyrant and the Carnifex. I think they're from 4th edition. They still look great and fearsome. I maybe don't like the flying Hive Tyrant. I think that looks a little bit dated and could be updated a wee bit, but the walking Hive Tyrant and Carnifex still look awesome. But the other part is that Tyranids had consistent updates between 4th, 5th, 6th and 7th edition. Mainly in 6th and 7th is where you saw a lot of their big bugs coming out, and that's why I think mainly there was sort of easier to build big things years and years back. So that's why you may have seen Knights, you may have seen big Tyranids. They've got loads of big creatures added, but they completely forgot the infantry side. So yeah, Tyranids got huge big things and they do quite well, but it is the small bugs that are extremely lacking, and it's the ones we're buying, 30 in a squad. We struggle to work out why their upgrade should be, and I think it's mainly that we need to see. We need to see more Hermagonts, Termagants. They look so similar to each other, and they don't represent the horde that they should. So 6 out of 10, people may say is quite low, but I don't think any of the big bugs particularly need to be replaced. Maybe just the Hive Tyrant. I think the Carnifex still looks really well. The Hive Tyrant could maybe do with an update and some special characters, but it's the small stuff, it's the bugs, the small bugs need to be updated. But all the big stuff is actually quite recent, certainly in the past 10 years, which can't be the same said about, I think, Drukhari, Grey Knights and various other factions. So they've got a much lower score than I thought I was going to be giving them. And as a sort of bonus round, we're going to be looking at Ynnari. This is an interesting one. I had a few of the guys go, why are you talking about Ynnari? But ultimately this was a force that Games Workshop are still looking at. They did introduce at the tail end of 7th edition going into 8th, and then they did a wee bit of an update through White Dwarf, but I feel there's still so much potential in this force, so I gave them a 6 out of 10. Now in terms of their HQ troops, Lord of War, I'm giving them kind of like they're not up to date really at all, because they're taken from other forces and amalgamated, so it's a bit strange in that one. Ynnari is an interesting concept, taking some of the different factions of the Eldari and bringing them together. It reminds me very much of the End Times undead forces, where I could combine Tomb Kings and Vampire Counts, which I did when I played Fantasy, into one. I think you could do stuff with elves as well. I think you could take some Dark Elves and High Elves, don't quote me on that one, make them into one force. So I get the idea that we're going for this one, but Games Workshop need to decide whether to embrace this faction or not. If they do embrace it, then they need their unique units that need to be added that are exclusive to Ynnari, not just characters, but maybe a unit that looks both like trained after, I think it's the Visarch, basically the one in red armour, that's trained to be a little bit like Incubi, but uses some styles of Craftworlds, just to give them a little bit more of an individuality. Doesn't need to be many, because they already get loads of stuff from the Eldari forces, but just these few individual ones that make them feel a little bit more individual. And as I said, there needs to be, on the con side, very similar to this, Games Workshop need to embrace it or not. In the past few years, they seem to have not really embraced it by only giving them a White Dwarf up to date rather than a Codex, so it doesn't seem that they're giving them as much love as maybe they deserve if they're going to become a full-fledged force. If they are going to be pushed into a full-fledged force, then things need is the individual units, but if they're not going to put it into a full-fledged force, maybe they just need like a sort of supplement book that might do them well. Maybe one that had a supplement book for various things like Ynnari for Craftworlds, and then it also has Imperial Assassins, basically taking the White Dwarf stuff and putting it into a supplement book that would work for various different factions, having Inquisitors in it, etc. A supplement book for forces of the universe, and they basically add on to some of the more popular forces. I think that would do a lot of good for Ynnari, maybe Imperial, maybe some others, Xenos and Chaos as well. And that is it for me ranking which Force K model range needs updated. I am sure there's going to be many people telling me I am wrong, why I'm wrong, and why I'm right maybe in some areas as well, and I want to read them and debate you on them just as much. It's very interesting to look at each of the ranges. I then use some research looking into when mainly many of the ranges were updated, and I was very surprised by some of them, especially when it came to Tau and Tyranids. I didn't realise they were more up to date than I thought they were. I thought they were maybe in 5th edition, but many of the aspects of them were actually in 6th and 7th edition. That didn't mean that they didn't deserve more of an update, because maybe they weren't fully fledged out. For instance, the example of that was Drukhari, when they got updated in 5th, was a full update to the range, versus Tau and Tyranids, which was only sort of select areas. And by having that full update with Drukhari, it actually still has a lower score, because it feels more full, versus forces that only had wee parts added to it later on. So I'm very excited to hear what people think of this. Was I right? Was I wrong? Did I represent your force that you wanted correctly? Was I right to give some of them such a low score or a high score? Let me know. Thanks again for watching. Please comment, share, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in another Tabletop Assault Battle Report.